of the Israeli military from conducting activities in the country's schools. Bennett says he made the move against the group called Breaking the Silence because, quote, those who harm IDF soldiers do not have a place in the education system, end of quote. Questions continued to be raised about the foreign governmental funding that Breaking the Silence receives. We asked, though, the president of NGO Monitor, Professor Gerald Steinberg, whether such questions being raised about the funding are really a way of acting against the group because of its views.
Well, there's another side to this, and that is that you have, I don't know what kind of an organization it is, because we're really talking about maybe a dozen people, maybe half a dozen people that have any activist role, and they have anonymous testimonies, and they would not be significant. They're free to say whatever they want, but nobody would never know what they're doing. They wouldn't be quoted in UN reports. They wouldn't appear on campuses to provide fuel for boycotts, divestments, and sanctions, BDS, if they didn't have. Now I think we're talking about a couple of million shekels a year at least, $500,000 and probably more. They
From
get
where?
A lot of money. Sorry, it's more than that. It's right, a couple million shekels a year.
From where?
Primarily from foreign governments. The European Union is listed as, they've reported that the European Union is their biggest donor for 2015 so far. From 4 other governments that funnel their humanitarian international legal assistance through a university in Ramallah, the Birzeit University.
Which other governments?
These are the Danish, Swedish, Dutch, and Swiss governments. It's called the International Humanitarian Law Secretariat. Quite clear there that the governments, many of the officials, top officials in the government, members of parliament, have no idea where this money goes to. And it goes to 40 NGOs. Breaking the Silence is clearly one of the ones, because these are Israelis who say Israel commits war crimes, they get a lot more credibility and visibility, but the other groups in different ways contribute to the same BDS, demonization, lawfare agenda. So it's highly irresponsible from the governments to give this small group of what I call messianists a lot of money.
But we know that foreign funding goes to a lot of organizations. Are you going to tell me that no, let's call them for lack of a better term, no right-wing organizations get foreign funding?
It's about government funding. There's a very important difference between government and private funding. Governments are sovereign, and when a government, let's say in this case the European Union or 28 members of the European Union or the other 4 governments, provide millions of euros and dollars and pounds to Israeli civil society organizations, what are supposed to be non-governmental organizations. No other place in the world, no other democracy gets that kind of obsessive attention through money coming in. That's a whole different process.
And no right-wing governments?
Money, zero, from any foreign government going to organizations. I wouldn't even say right, I would even say centrist. All of that money goes to a very small fringe and empowers them, not in Israel, because they're not winning elections, it empowers them on campuses and in the media and in the UN, in other venues where there's already a strong tendency to be hostile to Israel. So they provide this fig leaf of authenticity and legitimacy, and in some cases anti-Semitism, to these types of campaigns, and that's because they have the money. We tracked, I think, 55 different venues so far this year that they've spoken at.
By the way,
the small group, same people over and over and over again.
What about NGO Monitor, by the way?
All of our money comes from private donations, and all of the sources are listed on our website. And in this case, Breaking the Silence does list their donations.
So you
know
don't,
who they are.
you
That's
don't,
not the problem.
you don't agree, Gerald, with some of the claims, arguments that I'm hearing from various people, from various circles, that it's a case of bullying by certain elements on the right?
I think that those are a lot of cliches in there. One could just as easily say that the elements on the left, whatever that may mean, or the people in Breaking the Silence with all that money, and in B'Tselem and in Yesh Din and all the other organizations and the Public Committee Against Torture in Israel, all those different groups are bullying millions of Israeli soldiers in some very crude ways. I do not think, and that's something we'll get to I'm sure in a second, that the type of activities that are done to counter that film, that video that was published by Im Tirtzu,
right.
I don't think that is any better. I think that's what happens is that discussion is dominated by the extremes.
Okay, right. So Im Tirtzu, you're saying yourself, is the other extreme, perhaps? They are promoting, what, a bill that you object to?
Well, it's not just the bill. The bill is somewhat different. First of all, their campaign and the use of the word in Hebrew shtulim, which is something like stool pigeons or provocative agent provocateurs. And the images, if you see that I think it's a 30 or 60-second video, the images there are poisonous. And it actually does a lot of damage to NGO Monitor's work, because we want to present the facts, and immediately the foreign diplomats say, yes, but look at this type of propaganda that goes out there. We can't really discuss these kinds of details about our funding when this kind of propaganda goes on. I try to say, well, that's our business, not yours, but it enables them to divert the attention from their own role.
And your fight, you're saying, is to stop this foreign governmental funding and to do away with the insults, but to deal with the substance of the issue.
Because there's no precedent. There's absolutely nothing else. Oh, the French consulate in Jerusalem provides breaking the silence, I think, with 65,000 shekels a year or in the last few months. The French consulate in Jerusalem, can you imagine if, let's say, the Israeli embassy, just as an example, in Paris, were to give a similar amount to a fringe French group to say that France is committing war crimes in its anti-terrorism activities? It's unimaginable. And yet the French government, we need to have this agenda on the public, this debate in the public agenda with the European funders, with other funders such as the New Israel Fund, which says they're Zionists, and I know a lot of them, they are Zionists, but very, very mistaken in their understanding. They're giving money. These types of groups are all seeded by the New Israel Fund. Now we have a new entry in the funding. That's the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and where Daniel Levy sits on the board of trustees under the title of, I think, Middle East Peace, giving money to the same Breaking the Silence and Jewish Voices for Peace. There's so much money out there, and there's so little responsibility. So clearly, to me, that's where the emphasis should be, because we're not going to prevent free speech, and we're just not going to give these very fringe Messianic voices the ability, the platform to dominate, both in Israel and outside Israel, the conversation.
The president of NGO Monitor, Professor Gerald Steinberg.